Interestingly, the chimpanzee was once idealized as a sort of innocent, benign cousin to humanity, a sort of more pristine, uncorrupted form of the human species. As more information came out, it became increasingly apparent that that was not an accurate depiction of the chimpanzee. Chimpanzees were not the harmless, friendly, always peaceful creatures they were portrayed in the media and by some scientists as well. They are, in fact, capable of great acts of brutality. They are predatory. They fight amongst each other. They are not so different than human beings. I think it's telling that something similar has happened after that with the bonobo, a different type of chimpanzee. The bonobo has been portrayed by many scientists as being a more innocent cousin of the chimpanzee. It's portrayed as a creature unlike the chimpanzee, contrasted with the chimpanzee, and by extent with human beings. The bonobo is portrayed as a peaceful, loving, kindly creature that does not engage in the same kinds of violent acts as chimpanzees. Now, is this true? Not for the most part. For the most part, bonobos are distinct in their behavior from chimpanzees, but they simply engage in different kinds of violence. They simply behave in different kinds of hierarchical violence against one another. They are certainly not innocent the way that they have often been portrayed. Now, why do people believe it in the case of the bonobo, perhaps even more strongly than that of the chimpanzee? Well, partly due to ideological constraints of the people making these claims. They want to portray the bonobo as being this different sort of human creature. It suits their ideological framework to portray the bonobo as a sort of benevolent, peaceful, freely sexual, human-like creature, partly because the bonobo is more matriarchal in nature than the chimpanzee. So it suits certain ideological beliefs to portray the chimpanzee, to portray the bonobo as being superior, ethically speaking, although that is such a ridiculous idea when applying it to something like a chimpanzee or a bonobo. But a superior ethical specimen that can be used as a model for idealized human behavior. Obviously, that's nonsense, but partly this is allowed to persist, this flawed perspective on the bonobo, because the bonobo inhabits a very politically unstable region of Africa, in which it has been consistently difficult for researchers to conduct thorough investigations on this creature. They have a hard time truly studying the creature in such a way as to get detailed information, much more so than the chimpanzee, which has a wider geographical distribution. Its habitat is more accessible. It's much easier to study and has been more extensively studied. So therefore, the bonobo has been allowed to persist in part as this almost mysterious kind of ape that has proven elusive for detailed study. A lot of the information that these ideologically motivated researchers have presented is gathered from captive specimens of the bonobo who have been studied in zoos and other non-wild habitats. But obviously that isn't a truly obviously is not an environment truly conducive to understanding the behavior of wild members of the species. And indeed, that has been shown in what research has been able to be conducted on wild communities of bonobos. It's been shown that the behavior of those in zoos is markedly different from those in the wild. Indeed, a lot of the assumptions and stereotypes of the bonobo, the positive stereotypes, such as their alleged peacefulness, their alleged hypersexuality, their use of sex to settle social conflicts rather than necessarily resorting to violence. A lot of these traits have been amplified and exaggerated in captivity to the extent that it's not even necessarily accurate in the wild. A lot of the more popular conceptions of the species don't necessarily hold true when it comes to wild specimens, which I think is very interesting because a lot of people have really taken these beliefs and run with them for their own purposes because it suits their worldview. Wild bonobos are entirely capable of, and indeed eager to resort to violence when it suits them, just as chimpanzees, just as humans. They are distinct from chimpanzees, it's true, in many ways, but they simply use violence and brutality in the pursuit of different goals. Let's say that. For example, if a female bonobo is trying to help her son mate with a female, the elder female bonobo, the mother, will often use force to coerce the younger female into mating with her son, which is not so different than what a chimpanzee might do, namely to use violence to coerce a female to mate with himself. So the idea that the bonobo is inherently some sort of idealized specimen of the human form is nonsense. And yet it persists, because it's a very comforting notion for people who want to believe that a matriarchal society would present some sort of utopian vision in which sex would be used more freely to solve social problems and there would be a less concern on strict hierarchy. But if one really analyzes the bonobo, and especially in comparison to the chimpanzee, one will find that this is not necessarily true. Indeed, there are many situations where the bonobo is just as vicious, perhaps even more so than the chimpanzee. And this really is all a matter of attempting to apply human mores and standards to other great apes, which is a completely doomed endeavor. No one with a mind worth having would do such a thing. Other great apes are very different creatures. They are similar in many ways. We are all similar as great apes, it's true. But human beings possess many things that the other great apes do not. It would be like trying to compare the social structure of mice compared to wolves. Obviously, they're both mammals. They both possess relatively sophisticated social structures, but the wolf possesses a much more complex social structure and a sense of community. The wolf is a much more complex social animal than the mouse. And to attempt to analyze the mouse by the standards of the wolf would be madness. No one should do that. It's not productive, it's not helpful, and it's certainly not enlightening.